In 1856, the hot heart of a Mississippi summer, a 9-year-old enslaved girl named Sara Sutton was buried alive on a plantation. 3 days later, she clawed her way out of her grave. What happened next would turn Blackwood Plantation into the most feared place in the South. A story whispered about but never spoken aloud. A tale of death and vengeance that no one could explain and everyone wanted to forget. This is that story. August, Blackwood Plantation, Mississippi. The heat was like a living thing, pressing down on everything, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to survive. The cotton fields stretched out white and endless under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Acres of wealth built on the backs of people who owned nothing, not even themselves. The plantation belonged to Margaret Sutton, a widow who had inherited it when her husband died. Margaret was tall and thin with gray eyes that never seemed to blink and a mouth that rarely smiled. She ran the plantation with an iron fist, determined to prove that a woman could manage such an enterprise as well as any man. She kept detailed records of every expense, every bale of cotton, every enslaved person. To Margaret, the plantation was a business. The people who worked it were inventory, nothing more. Sara Sutton carried Margaret's last name not through any family relation, but through ownership. She was born on the plantation, the daughter of a woman named Ruth, who had died bringing her into the world. From her first breath, Sara was marked as different. She was small and grew slowly, staying thin no matter how much she ate. Her skin was lighter than most of the other enslaved children, suggesting her father was white, though no one ever spoke about who he might have been. Some whispered it was Margaret's late husband, but those whispers never lasted long. Dangerous questions had a way of getting people sold or worse. By age 9, Sara was tiny, looking much younger than she was. Her eyes were large and dark, too old for her face, like she had seen things no child should see. She rarely spoke. When she did, her voice was so quiet people had to lean in close to hear. She never played with the other children, never ran or laughed. She just worked slowly and carefully and stayed as invisible as possible. Margaret called her the weak one and noted in her ledger that Sara's value was low. The overseer, a brutal man named Coleman Briggs, called her dead weight and worse things. Briggs was built like a bull with hands that had broken bones and a whip he used too often. He believed enslaved people were animals that needed to be broken, and he took pride in his ability to break even the strongest spirits. But Sara confused him. You couldn't break someone who never fought back. You couldn't instill fear in someone who already seemed terrified of everything. So he just made her work harder. Pushed her past what her small body could handle, hoping she would either toughen up or die. He didn't care which. The other enslaved people at Blackwood watched Sara with a mixture of pity and frustration. An old woman named Esther, who had been at the plantation for decades, tried to look after Sara when she could. Esther would sneak Sara extra food when possible, help her with the harder tasks when no one was watching, hold her at night when Sara woke up screaming from nightmares she never talked about. Esther said Sara reminded her of a bird with a broken wing, still alive but unable to fly, just waiting for something to end its suffering. There was a young man named Daniel who often worked near Sara in the fields. He would try to help her, carry her cotton sack when it got too heavy. But Briggs noticed everything and helping someone else meant both people got punished. Still, Daniel tried. He couldn't help himself. Something about Sara's quiet suffering touched something in him, made him angry at the injustice of it all in a way that was dangerous for an enslaved man to feel. The cotton harvest was the busiest and most important time of year. Everyone was pushed to their absolute limit. Each enslaved person was expected to pick a heavy quota of cotton per day. Adults who picked less faced punishment, usually whipping. Children were expected to pick a smaller, but still significant, amount. Sara had never once met this quota. Every day she fell short. Margaret docked her food rations. The logic was simple. If you don't produce enough to justify your food, you get less food. This created a downward spiral where underfed Sara became weaker and less productive, which led to more food reduction. Briggs added punishments of his own. He would make Sara work through meal breaks, assign her to the hottest, most difficult rows, would stand over her criticizing, mocking, sometimes cuffing her on the back of the head when she was too slow. He told her she was worthless, that she was stealing from the plantation, that she should be grateful she wasn't sold to the sugar fields where she would be dead within a year. One August day started like any other. The sun rose hot and angry. Sara dragged herself out of the small, cramped cabin she shared with Esther and others. She hadn't slept well. Her body hurt all the time now. A constant ache in her bones and muscles. She was coughing more lately, a dry hack that made her chest hurt. By noon, she had picked only a pitifully small amount of cotton. Her fingers were cut and bleeding from the sharp cotton bolls. Her back screamed with pain from bending over constantly. The sun was merciless. She had been given 1 cup of water at sunrise and wouldn't get another until sunset. She felt dizzy, her vision blurring. She had to fight the urge to just lie down in the dirt and not get up. Briggs rode through the fields on his horse in the afternoon, checking on workers. When he got to Sara's row, he dismounted and grabbed her nearly empty sack. He weighed it in his hand, his face darkening. His voice carried across the field, loud and angry, meant to be heard by everyone. Other workers stopped to watch, dreading what would come next. Sara stared at the ground, swaying slightly. She whispered an apology, her voice so quiet Briggs had to lean in to hear it. This made him even angrier. He yelled that she was a thief, stealing food from the plantation, from people who worked hard. He dragged Sara to the center of the field where everyone could see. This was standard practice. Punishment was meant to be public, to serve as a warning to others. He pulled out his whip. An old woman named Esther started forward, but Daniel grabbed her arm, held her back. His eyes were full of pain, but he shook his head. Getting involved would just mean 2 people getting whipped instead of 1. They had all learned this lesson before. You couldn't save everyone. Briggs raised the whip. Sara did not look up. She did not cry. She just waited. The whip cracked through the heavy air, a sound that made everyone flinch. It landed across Sara's thin back, tearing through her dress. She gasped, a small, choked sound, but did not scream. He struck her again, and again. He did not stop at the usual number of lashes. His anger at her silence, at her seeming inability to even react properly, fueled him. The blows rained down. Sara fell to her knees, then onto her side in the dirt. Still, she made almost no sound. Finally, Briggs stopped, breathing heavily. Sara lay motionless. Get up, Briggs ordered. She did not move. He kicked her side, not hard, but enough to jolt her. Get up and get back to work. You're not done for the day. Sara stirred. With an immense effort that made the workers watching want to look away, she pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. Her back was a mess of torn fabric and bloody welts. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She collapsed back into the dirt. Briggs stared down at her, his contempt complete. Useless, he spat. He looked around at the frozen field workers. All of you, back to work. This is what happens to thieves and shirkers. He grabbed Sara by the arm and hauled her up, dragging her toward the edge of the field where a toolshed stood. He threw her inside onto the dirt floor. You sit here and think about your worthlessness. No water, no food. You'll work twice as long tomorrow to make up for today. He slammed the door, plunging Sara into darkness. The shed was an oven, trapping the day's heat. Sara lay where she had fallen, the pain from her wounds a distant fire compared to the deep, cold exhaustion in her core. She coughed, the sound wet and ragged in the dark. Hours passed. The light under the door faded. The sounds of the plantation settled into the buzz of night insects. No one came. Esther tried to sneak to the shed after dark, but Briggs had posted himself on the porch of the main house, watching. His message was clear. In the shed, Sara's breathing grew shallower. The heat, the dehydration, the shock of the beating, and the sickness in her lungs converged. Sometime before dawn, her breathing stopped. When Briggs opened the shed door at first light, he found her curled on the ground, cold and still. He felt for a pulse at her neck, then dropped her hand with a grunt. He went to report to Margaret Sutton. The Sutton girl is dead, he said, standing in the cool, shaded hallway of the big house. Margaret looked up from her ledger, her expression one of mild annoyance. Which one? The small one, Sara. Yes, ma'am. Margaret sighed, a sound of inconvenience. A net loss. See that she's buried. Today. Use the men from the west field, they're ahead of quota. Don't let it disrupt the harvest schedule. Yes, ma'am. The burial was a hurried, silent affair. No coffin. Sara's small body was wrapped in an old cotton sack. The grave was dug in a corner of the plantation's burial ground, a patch of worn earth under a sprawling oak tree where the enslaved were laid to rest. There were no markers. Daniel was one of the men ordered to dig. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard as stone as he worked. Esther stood at a distance, her head bowed, her lips moving in silent prayer. They lowered the small bundle into the ground. Briggs watched, impatient. Hurry it up. The day's wasting. The dirt was shoveled back in, covering the tiny form. The men patted the earth down with their shovels. It was done. For 3 days, life at Blackwood Plantation continued as normal. The sun beat down, the cotton was picked, the whip cracked. Sara's absence was noted, but not mourned aloud. She had been a ghost long before she died. On the evening of the 3rd day, a storm gathered on the horizon. The air grew thick and still, charged with a strange energy. The enslaved people in their cabins spoke in hushed tones, feeling a tension they couldn't name. Deep beneath the oak tree, in the dark, airless earth, something stirred. A small hand, caked in dirt, fingers broken and bleeding, pushed upward. Then another. With a desperate, silent strength that had never shown itself in life, Sara Sutton clawed at the heavy soil above her. She did not know how she was breathing in the dark earth, did not know how her heart had started again with a slow, thick beat. She knew only the primal need for air, for light, to be out. She broke through just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Her head emerged from the ground, then her shoulders. She pulled herself free of the grave, collapsing onto the wet, churned earth. The rain washed the dirt from her face, from her eyes. She lay there, gasping, the cool water a shock against her skin. Her back, where the whip marks had been, was now a strange, smooth lattice of pale scars. She sat up, looking around with eyes that saw differently. The world was sharper, clearer, but tinged with a cold, dark light. She could feel the plantation around her, the fear in the cabins, the cold calculation in the big house, the brutal confidence in the overseer's shack. She could feel the land itself, the suffering it had absorbed. Slowly, she stood on unsteady legs. Her dress was a tattered, muddy shroud. She began to walk, not toward the cabins of the living, but with a quiet, deliberate purpose toward the heart of the plantation. The first thing she came to was the toolshed where she had died. She placed her small hand against the rough wood of the door. The wood, once just planks, seemed to groan and shrink in on itself. When she removed her hand, the outline of her palm was burned into the wood, smoking slightly in the damp air. The shed became a place of profound cold, a chill that would never leave it. She walked on through the rain, past the silent cabins, toward the main house. In her room, Margaret Sutton was reviewing her ledger by lamplight, adding the final notation for Sara Sutton, deceased. Value null. A gust of wind blew her window open, extinguishing the lamp. In the sudden dark, Margaret felt a wave of dizziness. The numbers on the page seemed to writhe and blur before her eyes. When she relit the lamp, the ink had run on Sara's entry, a black stain spreading across the page like a wound. From that night, Margaret would find her carefully kept numbers constantly in error, her accounts never balancing, her control slipping away into confusion. Sara's path led her next to the overseer's shack. Inside, Coleman Briggs slept, dreaming of quotas and obedience. Sara stood outside his window. She did not need to speak. Her presence, her silent, undeniable aliveness, seeped into his dreams. He awoke with a start, sweating, the image of a small girl rising from dark earth burned behind his eyes. He stumbled to his washbasin, splashing water on his face. In the water's reflection, just for a second, he saw not his own face, but Sara's, her dark eyes staring back at him from the grave. He cried out, knocking the basin over. From that night, sleep would forever evade him. Every shadow held her shape, every sound the scratch of earth on wood. His confidence, his cruel certainty, began to rot from within, replaced by a gnawing, unspeakable fear. Finally, Sara turned toward the cabins. She approached the one she had shared. Inside, Esther slept fitfully. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart a hard knot of anger and grief. The door, though latched, swung slowly open. Esther awoke and saw the small, mud-streaked figure in the doorway, backlit by lightning. She did not scream. A profound sadness and a stranger peace filled her. "Child," she whispered. Sara looked at her, then at Daniel. In her gaze, there was no accusation, only a deep, ancient knowing. She raised a hand, not in greeting, but in a kind of blessing or release. Then she turned and walked back out into the storm, disappearing into the sheeting rain. Daniel rushed to the door, but she was gone. All that remained was a single, clean footprint in the mud, already washing away. The next morning, the storm had passed. The air was cleansed but heavy with a new silence. Word spread through the quarters before first light, passed in whispers too awed to be loud. Sara was back. She had been seen. The grave was open. Briggs, his face haggard from a sleepless night, tried to roar the people to the fields, but his voice lacked its usual force. The workers moved, but their eyes kept drifting to the oak tree, to the disturbed earth. Margaret Sutton emerged from her house, her ledger in hand, but her steps were uncertain. She looked at the open grave, then at the people, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her cold composure. She saw not inventory, but witnesses. Blackwood Plantation did not cease to function that day, but a change had taken root. A palpable dread settled over the land, a chill in the air that no sun could warm. It was not a fear of punishment, but a fear of something older, something that the ledgers and whips could not measure or control. Sara herself was never seen clearly again. But she was felt, in the cold spot that forever lingered in the toolshed, in the numbers that would never again add up for Margaret Sutton, in the nightmares that forever haunted Coleman Briggs, in the strange, resilient hope that now flickered in the hearts of the enslaved. The weak one, the worthless one, had returned. And in returning, she had broken the world's cruel math. The plantation continued, but it was haunted ground, a place where the buried things did not stay buried, and where the price of everything was finally, terrifyingly, coming due.